One of the things is, as we shared, the harbingers are continuing, as we're talking. We just touched on before, you and I were talking about one of the harbingers, which is the second harbinger, which is the harbinger of the terrorist. And that is that in ancient Israel, when you had that first strike warning, it was brought about by the Assyrians, who were the masters of terrorism. People don't realize the Assyrians invented terrorism. You look at history, they invented terrorism.
This is the ancient Assyrian Empire that was headquartered in Nineveh.
Yes.
And they did. They literally sought to inspire fear and terror in their enemies.
Absolutely.
And they would skin and flay them alive.
They
decapitate them.
Yes, they invented terror as a form of literally strategy, and every terrorist to this day is a descendant spiritually, or and can be more than that, of the Assyrians. So you have the sign of the second harbinger is the sign of the Assyrian or the terrorist. So that this first strike on the nation is an act of terror, which happened to America 9/11. So I've always been wondering since then, because the pattern is that Israel, when it had that first strike by the Assyrians, but then years later, they didn't repent, but years later, they enter into another conflict with Assyria. And what happens is this second conflict brings destruction to the land.
It's all right. It destroys the temple of the northern kingdom, Samaria, and they are deported and carried away.
Yeah. So you have the same people who brought the first strike of terror. They are the ones. The nation gets into another conflict, and they bring the calamity. Well, so I'm watching. Is America going to be involved in another calamity, another thing there? Well, just recently, I was in the Capitol. The Lord called me to speak to members of Congress. The president made a speech that night. He announced we are going to war with ISIS. ISIS is that they are centered in the same area,
same geographic area,
the core of ancient Assyria. That's Syria and Iraq. Iraq is ancient Assyria. They just took over Mosul, which is Nineveh.
Yes.
They are already being likened like no other people to the ancient Assyrians. They are bloodthirsty. They inflict terror on their people. They are an offshoot of Al-Qaeda, which means it's the same people. Here's the pattern: the same people as who did the strike of 9/11, and they are, the Assyrians literally decapitated their victims and they put them on display. ISIS decapitates their victims, puts them on display in social media, just like what the Assyrians would do to this day.
Inspire terror.
Yeah, so here we are. It's a bit chilling. We are now entering the second part of this, and they are terrorists. And the thing is, when the president announced this, it was the eve of 9/11 when he
said this.
When he announced it. And literally the date was 9/10. Isaiah 9:10 is the vow. I'm not saying.
Well, and you and I are calling them ISIS, and my research leads me to believe that our president and others refer to them as ISIL.
Yes.
But that's Islamic State of Iran and the Levant.
Yes.
And I'm told that the Levant is a term that means the whole region.
Yes.
And there's no Israel in there.
No, of course.
It's the obliteration of Israel.
Yes.
So when you declare ISIL, you're saying no Israel.
Yeah, absolutely. And they would like no America too.
Of course. We're the great Satan.
Yes.
Israel's the little Satan.
And when the president made his speech, he did a weird thing. And there's always things, because here we're watching leaders actually voice these judgment things without even realizing these are signs. But he says, basically, the Harbinger and the Shemitah talk about two shakings. You have 9/11, and then you have the economic collapse in 2008. He says 13 years ago, basically, we had this great shaking. And then he says 6 years ago, we had the economic shaking.
Do the math.
He mentioned 7 years apart. Well, number one, they're 7 years apart.
13 and minus 6.
And when you add the 7, they come to the next completion.
15.
And he announced this on the eve of 9/11. And this is all.
He doesn't maybe even know what he's saying because
he doesn't anymore.
The high priest prophesied in the year that Jesus was the week that Jesus was crucified, and he didn't know he spoke prophecy.
That's what's
God will speak through anyone when He chooses to.
Yes, that's what's happening with the harbingers, and then the president writing on the tower. So the thing is that we are heading now. The point of the Shemitah ultimately is to bring the nation back to God. That's the point. It's a shaking where everything else is shaken, everything else the nation trusts in is shaken, and it's to bring the nation back to God. I believe a great shaking is coming, but the point of it is to bring the
Amen.
nation and all those who will listen back to God. That's why I wrote the book. And things are coming.
And it is a word of hope, Jonathan.
Ultimately,
and I thank you
absolutely.
for that word of hope.
Oh,
and
thank